Wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deeper seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. But time is running out. What if my best days aren't over? They can be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days aren't over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Good evening, everybody. It's John here from Tutor to You, welcoming you along to another exam clinic, this time for Paper 2 for OCR A-Level Law. Good evening to anybody who's watching us live. Just so you know that it's welcome to Josh. He's year 12, but he's trying to do a little bit of cheeky revision. Welcome to Josh. But I suspect the majority of you watching tonight are just a few days away from your Paper 2. I know there's a little bit of chat there about Paper 1 and how that went. Let's park that. Let's think about Paper 2, only a few days away. Now, what we're going to do tonight is try and field as many questions as we can over the next 20 to 25 minutes. So do feel free to pop them into the chat window on YouTube as soon as you've got anything that you would like to ask. And I have two wonderful experts with me tonight to try and answer those questions. I've got Rubina on the right hand side of the screen and I've got Emily in the middle. Good evening to you two. How are you two?
Good, thank you. You okay?
Hello. Good, thank you.
Good to hear, and I'm okay, thank you. Now listen, just before we start to answering any of the questions that come into the chat window, I know that we've got one or two things that we wanted to just quickly nip through in terms of the process of the Paper 2. Shall we move on to that and then start to field some questions in a few moments' time? Okay, let me hand you over there then.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with Tutor to You tonight. I hope that you find this session beneficial in preparation for your exam next week. So, first question, do I need to answer all of the questions on the paper? No, please do not do that. This was the first thing that we spoke about at our Unit 1 revision session last time. You will have the option of 2 8 markers, 2 12 markers, and then you'll also have other options with Section B, which I'll come to in a moment. So starting off with Section A. Section A is worth a quarter of your overall marks, so you should only spend half an hour on this section. In terms of timing, you should spend 30 minutes for every 20 marks that are available. 30 minutes for every 20 marks that are available. So in section A, you have to answer one 8-mark question and one 12-mark question, but you do have a choice of 2 of each. So for example, you could get 2 8-mark questions, and one of them could be on parliamentary lawmaking and the other one on delegated legislation. Do not answer both of them. Choose which one you feel as though you could answer the best and answer that one. And then it's the same for the 12-marker. You again get a choice of 2. So you could get one on, again, parliamentary lawmaking or delegated legislation, or one of the other topics on section A of unit 2. But again, only answer one of those. So to clarify, section A is worth 20 marks, and that's made up of one 8-mark question from a choice of 2 and one 12-mark question, again, from a choice of 2. So to put it clearly, do not answer all of the questions on the paper. You will be wasting time and losing marks. Moving on to section B. This is the biggest chunk of your exam. So you want to be spending the majority of your time on this. So it'll be about 90 minutes that you spend on this. Aim to spend about half an hour on each of those 20 markers on section B. You will have 2 options. You'll have part 1 and part 2. Do not feel like you have to read the scenarios on both sides. Read the questions first, because you know yourself whether you are better at one topic compared to another. So if you think, if negligence comes up, I'm definitely answering that one. But if Rylands v Fletcher comes up, I don't want to answer that one. That'll help you. So read the questions first, decide which section you're going to do, but only answer the 3 questions on part 1 or part 2. Do not answer all 6. Again, you will be losing marks and wasting a lot of time. So section B will consist of 2 scenario questions and 1 evaluation question. Dependent on whether you choose section part 1 or part 2, your scenario questions will be different. However, your evaluation question will remain the same. So the evaluation question won't change regardless of whether you choose part 1 or part 2. And if we just very quickly go on to the next slide, there's some information about the exam timings. So could we flick on to the next slide there, John? Thank you so much. So if anybody wants to take a quick picture of this or make a few notes of this, like I said, in terms of timings, you want to spend half an hour on section A, 90 minutes on section B. And to break that down a little bit further, it's 30 minutes per 20 marks. That does include reading time, and it also does include you making a decision about which question you're going to answer. So don't take too long to decide which question you're going to answer. It might be that you want to jot down a few quick notes to figure out how much you can recall from a particular topic. That's fine, but don't be spending 10 minutes deciding, okay, and planning. Okay. I think we've got quite a lot of questions coming through. I haven't been reading them through, but I've been noticing them in my peripheral vision. So
Yeah, there was an early one from Lisa, I think, asking disadvantages of the legislative process. So quite a good one to shout there, Lisa. I know a couple of people tried to help you in the chat as well. But yeah, I'd talk about the length of time, so the fact it's time consuming, delays. I'd do a democracy point, really, that it's undemocratic, because although we do vote MPs in, and obviously at the minute the Labour government, you've got your House of Lords and you've got the monarch as well, so 2/3 of Parliament are unelected, so you could do a good disadvantage point on that. I always tell my students to pick on the lack of public awareness, so the fact that we don't often know we can get involved in that process, even though it's meant to be for us. And then when we do get involved, the tactics that we use are probably not very good. Might be worth noting as well for these questions, if they are asking disadvantages, you are allowed to flip that point at the end and do maybe a however, as long as it links back to the point. So you wouldn't be able to do an advantage, but you could do your 4 disadvantages on the legislative process, but each one could have a bit of a counter flip, and that would help gain some credit as well there. So I'm hoping sort of a few points around that would be helpful for you there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about counter-argument there.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning, if the question specifically asks about disadvantages, always start with the disadvantage and use the advantage as a counter-argument. Don't do it the other way around. because otherwise you wouldn't get the mark. Even though the
Yeah.
content is the same, it's just the way that you structure it is important. So to clarify, answer the question first.
Yeah.
So make your point about the advantage or the disadvantage, whichever the question is about, and then your counter argument can be about the alternative.
Yeah.
I've just noticed another question there from PC about occupiers liability 1957 being the most likely. We don't love to predict. However, the occupiers liability evaluation hasn't been on yet, whereas the 84 one has. So it's possibly more likely to come up. However, like I say, we can't predict what the exam board are going to do. They do seem to be getting more specific with both
Yeah.
the scenario and their evaluation questions, I would say. So my advice
Mm.
there is definitely don't choose something to not revise. My students
Yeah.
kept asking me this. I was like, please
And,
don't do that.
and I think this you're quite lucky with this paper because there's a lot less topics. So obviously, I know a few of you have been chatting
Yeah.
about paper one in the chat there. You've only got 3 possible areas for that essay question: negligent, occupiers, vicarious. So I think because it is so narrow, you've got a real good opportunity there to really ramp those marks up, especially for those of you that did think paper one was quite tough. But yeah, I agree with Emily. It's hard to predict because of that nature. Generally most, if not all, the topics are on that paper for the talk because
Yeah.
it is slim pickings in that sense. But yeah, definitely I'd walk in there knowing this is what I'm going to say on 57, 84, vicarious neg. But I agree with Emily, they are getting quite specific. So if you look at that last paper from last summer, the causation essay, just causation and negligence. So even if it were to be 57, it might be quite narrow. It might just ask about adults or your sort of professional visitors, your tradesmen in that sense. So definitely have an idea of what you want to say as you're going in there, because you have got that benefit of there only being 3 sort of possible areas.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of going a bit off tangent here, but in
Mm-hmm.
terms of scenario questions, don't forget to revise remedies.
Yeah.
We don't know that they wouldn't do a 20 marker purely on remedies. So, and defences as well. Last year they
Yeah.
did public nuisance defences, I believe.
Private nuisance defences.
Yeah. And sorry, private nuisance defences. And I think a lot of students would have been put off by that. So again, my advice is don't choose something to not revise here. I know it's tempting to predict and then only focus on the content that you're predicting to come up. But even if the content that you predict to come up does come up, they can be a lot more specific than you'd expect them to. In previous years, it was very like broad and open, and you could pretty much talk about anything. It would be like, is it fair? And you could pretty much include any advantage or disadvantage that you'd been taught. So just be careful when you come to predicting that you don't think, oh, well, that's not likely to come up, so I won't revise that, because they are just being so much more specific now.
And especially,
Hannah,
like you say, something like remedies, because it wasn't in there last summer, was it?
yeah. So it's a potential.
Yeah, Hannah has got a
I'm
good
just not
question there.
Hannah. Yeah.
Abatement, was it? The abatement one. Is abatement the same as mitigation of loss? So mitigation of loss is your responsibility as a claimant to try and keep the costs down. So that could be relevant depending on what we're suggesting the claimant's going to be looking for. Abatement is a self-help remedy, so I think PC answered it a little bit further down for abatement for you. So yeah, abatement's a remedy, whereas mitigation of loss is your responsibility to keep those costs down. Use NHS rather than sort of private hospitals, or if it's a car crash, let's say it's a negligence scenario, you might suggest that they get a hire car similar to theirs rather than something that's really expensive. So yeah, they are 2 slightly different things, but again, good picking on that, because again, it would be something that normally students might just not look at, but it could be something that's in there.
There's a couple of people that have asked about the sections. So Rebecca and somebody else, I'm sorry, I've lost you. But 2 people have asked about the sections for occupiers liability.
Yeah.
They're both about occupiers liability. So ideally, yes, know the sections. I realise that there are a lot, and there's subsections within that as well. I would advise, if you're trying to narrow down the content that you're trying to keep in your brains, because I know there's a lot, you could narrow it down to the definitions that you need to be aware of and the sections when it comes to duty of care and the standard of care that you need to reach. There's obviously sections that you need to be aware of when it comes to defences and things like that as well. But I would say if you're trying to narrow down the content and you're doing that because you keep forgetting all of the sections, those are the most important sections for you to recall. Would you agree, Rabina, or is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even though there is a lot of content, Occupiers is the only one with an Act of Parliament. So I would definitely try and focus that on there. And the sections count as cases. So even if you just did, 2.2 for adults, 2.3a children, same with
Yeah.
the Occupiers 84. If you just have 1.3a, 1.3b, 1.3c, that counts as it counts the same as cases there. So you don't need all of them, because if you've got other cases or sections to back yourself up, you'll be fine. So don't worry about sort of losing marks or anything like that. It's just more making sure you have got a good use of case authority or statute. But I would say, because Occupiers is the only one, I would focus on that. A lot easier than sort of paper 1 and paper 3 for sections.
There are still a couple of key cases that you'd be expected to know for the definitions. So, wheel versus corpus and wheat versus lacon.
Yeah,
Escaped
we
my brain.
use.
And so premises as well. Yeah. Okay. Hannah has asked, how do we apply Rule 2 for vicarious liability?
Where is she? I can't see it.
Just underneath Rebecca.
Yeah. It confuses everybody there, Hannah. So it'd be a great essay, just because of all the changes that's happened through the case law. This is a problem when things are made by judges. So part 2 for vicarious, then, is your close connection test, isn't it? Whether what you've done, whatever it is that you've done wrong, is closely connected to what you're authorised to do. So judges have been advised to look at any sort of previous decisions that have been made. So you might have some of those categories sort of authorised but negligent, careless way, frolics, outside your scope. So there'll be certain categories that could possibly be relevant, but what you're asked to look at really is whether what they've done is closely connected to what they are authorised to do. They're looking at their field of activities, what their role actually would be. The summer paper from last year is a really good one to maybe have a look at the next couple of days, because the scenario on vicarious was just on part 2. So you had 3 scenarios and each one fit into one of those categories nicely. I think from top of my head, authorised but negligent, unauthorised to benefit the business, and frolic. So it might be worth having a look. But yeah, that's what you're doing. So you're going to tell me what the part 2 of the test is, and then look, if it's a scenario, look to see if there's any of those that would be relevant to the people that's in that question. And if it's an essay, just give a couple, maybe an example of something that is closely connected, and something that isn't. But it is quite an ever-changing topic, vicarious, isn't it, Emily?
Absolutely. I've just thought of something that might help you. We don't have time to do a full revision blast on vicarious liability at the moment, obviously, but Tutor 2 have like tons and tons of revision blasts that they record. So if you haven't been able to attend one previously and you've missed out on it, have a look at their website and go and watch the revision blast. And you can even just fast forward it to the part that you're interested in, because if I remember rightly, they've actually got a slide where they separate what would be classed as acting in the course of employment and what wouldn't be acting in the acting in the course of employment. And my students found that particularly useful, the one that attended, and they told me they took a screenshot, or they just took a photo of that slide in particular because it was really helpful. So I'd recommend that if you want to do some focused revision on vicarious liability. And the same for any of them, to be honest. There's tons of revision blasts to have a look through.
Yeah.
Right, let's get another question.
Thank you. Can you use it? Lisa Mellon's put another one up. Can you use OLA 1984 to use as a compare point to evaluate? You could do. It depends what you're trying to say. I think you possibly could do, but I wouldn't do it in every paragraph. So if the question was on about claimants, I suppose you could talk about the fact that they are entitled, to more rights under 57 in comparison to 84, because it's property damage as well as personal injury. So I think if you're doing it on the sort of a stance of comparing a difference, that would be good. But I wouldn't do it in every question, every paragraph, unless the essay is both. That is on the specification. It could ask you to compare both. So, that. You could do it then, but if I would definitely maybe look at it in at least one, but I wouldn't do it in all 4 unless the question is really asking you to sort of pick the differences between the 2 acts.
Yeah, just if it's relevant to the point that you're making.
Mm.
I've noticed somebody, Isha is asking about past papers and private nuisance. It's worth mentioning that the specification changes, and so the law specification in particular, OCR, has changed about 3 times in the past 5 years because it got updated again and again after the
Yeah.
spec change. So one of the major changes was that content got reduced.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they removed was some of the evaluation from both criminal law and tort law. And so now they've been quite specific as to what you need to revise for the evaluation. So please do not revise evaluation for anything other than the 3 things that you can be asked to evaluate in tort law, which is, please correct me if I'm wrong, Rabina, because I haven't taught this for a while. Rylands v. Fletcher got removed, private nuisance got removed, so it's vicarious, negligence, and occupiers. Is that right?
Yeah, just those
Yes.
3.
Thanks. So it's worth remembering that. So negligence, vicarious, and occupiers. If you are looking at old revision resources, old textbooks, even old tutor to you resources that haven't been updated yet from a couple of years ago, just be aware that the spec has changed since then, and you only need to revise the evaluation of those 3 things. So no,
Yeah.
evaluation of Rylands v. Fletcher won't be on there. I think that was actually on last year, wasn't it? As the evaluation question.
Which one?
Rylands v. evaluation.
No,
Was it?
because it's not been up for a while now because of the spec change. So it was causation in negligence last summer,
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I
and
was thinking
then
of 2023.
it was definitely on there previous before the change. So
Yeah.
that's a good point, to be fair, because depending on how far you're looking back on the papers, you don't want to sort of confuse yourselves there. So yeah, just those 3. I've just seen another question there that Hannah's got the paper in front of her, so that's good. Frola, do we need to apply factual and legal causation? No, you don't. It's not relevant to either of the occupiers questions there. It's just what standard of care should have been given to the visitor if it's a visitor or trespasser going through the 3-part criteria. So you don't need to worry about the causation aspect there. And then PC's just put there, do we do 3 developed paragraphs for 12-mark question? It depends how developed they are, PC. I'd probably aim to go between 4 and 5, unless you're going to do something like a point, develop point, well developed point, well developed point. Unless you're going to keep going, I would try to sort of get between 4 and 5 just so that it's enough. And don't forget, like we said earlier, you can use that counter argument if you wish, if you're getting a bit tough with it. I know I say to my students sometimes, if they struggle to develop it further, just flip that argument, but just remember you can't then keep going with that flip. That's rewriting your question, and they definitely won't give you marks for that. Do you lose marks? You don't lose marks for anything, so don't worry about that. Put in only put in 1 name. No. So I just teach wheat rather than wheat and Laken. I only put the first names in my resources anyway, generally. So yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, Rishi, you're correct. 4 to 5, I'd say. There's any more? There's a couple more just popping through now.
Yeah, just to clarify, OCR don't negatively mark.
No.
So you do incorrectly just doesn't get taken into account, if that makes sense. We do positive marking, so we're basically looking for marks when we're marking the papers. So if you get something wrong, you don't get marked negatively for it. It just means you can't move up the level that we do in, for example. So the way that OCR will mark is they won't read a sentence and go, oh, that's an AO1, tick, you get a point. And we don't go, oh, well, that was wrong, minus a point. The way that we mark is we read the entire thing. So we'll read the whole 8 marker, the whole 12 marker, the whole 20 marker, and then we will put it into a level, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then within that level, we will decide whereabouts you are. So whether you're top, middle, or bottom of that level. That's how OCR mark, in case anybody was interested. Lisa Mellon, how many cases should you aim to learn roughly for each topic? Oh, I would struggle to answer that question because every topic is different. As you know, going from each topic, even in section A, there are so many cases, for example, in statutory interpretation, and pretty much none in parliamentary lawmaking. So it honestly just depends on the content. It's not about getting a certain number of cases. It's about illustrating the legal principles.
Yeah.
That's the key important thing. But because so many students ask us, we generally have given the advice that for a 20 marker, aim for 4 pieces of authority. But that does not mean it has to be cases. It can be a section in an Act of Parliament, or it can be a case. Any authority is included. But that's for 20 markers. But again, it is entirely dependent on the topic that you're doing. There's going to be a lot more cases, for example, in statutory interpretation, judicial precedent, than there are for parliamentary lawmaking.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And I agree with you there. It's about what you can show with the case, especially for something like statutory interpretation. If you're using a literal case, you could waffle on about facts forever, but unless you've shown us what it is that we're interpreting there, using that dictionary definition, that's really what they're looking at there.
I want
Rebecca,
to point out
sorry.
something there. Sorry, with the statutory interpretation question, if you get that as a question, a common error is to simply describe the facts of the case and just say a case that illustrates this rule is this, and all people do is describe the facts of the case. So, for example, you'll say Cheeseman, did what he did, but won't actually say that the word that needed to be interpreted was passengers and explain what that meant and the fact that they used a dictionary at the time, which led to this result. It's the legal principle that's important, not the actual facts of the case. You can almost get away with not remembering what happened as long as you're describing illustrating the legal principle. All right.
Yeah. I've just seen a message from Rebecca there. Don't panic. I've just seen that. I've been doing 3 this whole time. But the 3 that you've been doing might be really developed points and still be getting really strong marks. So don't panic at all. Just focus on thinking about what you're going to do for these next ones. And again, you are quite limited with those 12 markers. Different things that can be asked. As Emily said, the specification got narrowed a little bit a few years ago, so have a look at your parliamentary lawmaking. Do you know positives and negatives about the process? Delegated legislation, do you know everything positive and negative that you could talk about there? Work through those booklets and think, right, do I know what I'm going to say? And hopefully you'll go in there on Tuesday and having that choice of those 12 markers and being able to do those developed points there.
And remember, Rebecca, if you have only been doing 3, a very easy way of solving that problem is to add a counter argument on the end of each one, and then you're making it a very well developed point. So rather than trying to learn 2 additional evaluation points, just improve the ones that you've already revised. Just add a counter argument on the end of each one. So, for example, if you're doing parliamentary making advantages, just add on the end that it takes a lot of time, for example, and issues with the controls or something like that. Okay, let's get another question. What would you say? Well, question from Hannah. What would you say is similar between all of the topics? So, for example, defences and remedies are similar between a few, but is there anything else? I suppose negligence kind of runs throughout a couple of them.
Yeah. I think that's probably it, really, in that sense, isn't it? Because negligence there's some element of breaching your duty for the 2 OLAs. Vicarious suing the employer because it's the employee that's done something there. Just expand a bit, Hannah, in the chat so we can sort of pick on what it is you're wanting to grasp at there. Isha asked about paper 3. Well, there's about 11,500 students every year, Isha, that do the qualification, and there is a split between human rights and contract. I don't know what that split is. Personally, I teach human rights, but I know a lot of people teach contract law in their colleges, so I think it's just a mixture really up and down the country depending on teacher specialism and what they think you would maybe enjoy learning.
And remember, we are going to be doing a paper 3 revision clinic on that paper as well, specifically. I don't know if we're doing it specific to human rights or contract. I can't remember now.
No, I don't. Oh, Lisa does contract. I've just
It is human rights.
Oh, it's human rights, right?
Oh,
Perfect.
is it? Human rights one. Yeah, it does tend to be a bit more difficult, the human rights one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I agree
Contract
there
law
as well.
Sorry,
a lot of time to practice. No, I'm just looking at Isha's comment there about time practice. Definitely have a think about that. And then I always advise my students, as soon as you're in there, look at the question paper, choose what ones you're going to do, and maybe just make some little notes at the side. So for the 12 marker, you might just put what your points would be, to sort of start you off there. Same with the essay. And then, as Emily said at the very start, look at what the questions are asking for the scenarios before you choose the side, because sometimes side 2 is easier, and the students haven't looked, they've just seen something on the first side like negligence and just gone straight with it. Whereas for me, I mean, I do like negligence, but if there was a Rylands, I'd do that every day of the week. But that's just personal preference, because it's just an easy acronym to work through.
Okay.
I think we may have run out of time. I know we're looking down to see if there's one or two more questions there, but I think we have run out of time. Listen, many thanks to those of you who have posed questions tonight. They've been very, very useful. I hope you found the responses valuable. A massive thank you, of course, to Rabina and Emily for answering them so well. I hope you found the questions interesting as well. I think we've mentioned as well, we have got one more revision clinic for paper 3 this time next week, so do join us for that, where we will be concentrating on human rights. So if you are taking that part of the paper, please do join us then. So I've said my thank yous to everybody, to everybody who's contributed. So that just leaves me the opportunity to say the very, very best of luck from Rabina, from Emily, from myself, from everybody at Tutor with your exam next Tuesday. We'll have our fingers crossed. We hope the right questions pop up for you and it goes really well for you. If you found tonight useful, please do give us a thumbs up in the YouTube chat window. That helps us get our message out there. The questions that Emily was going through, or at the beginning of the session, will be available to download in a few months as well. So if you want to look back through those, do feel as if you can do that as well. There we go. Good luck, everybody. See you again sometime very soon. Goodbye.
Good luck.
Good luck. Bye.